it is happening, folks. The Russian summer offensive has officially started. And if we start looking at the maps, you could see that Russians are taking more land in Ukraine and stepping up offenses. And so I figured, let's go ahead and kind of dive into the maps, talk about exactly where we are and realistically speaking, what we're going to expect in the next few days. First and foremost, we're going to cite a few different things here. One, deep state maps, in which if you want up-to-date geolocated maps about what's happening on the front lines, you can jump online and check that stuff out, because let me tell you, this stuff is always spot on. And so we do know from the Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi that Russia has picked up a lot of its attacks across the entire front line. We're talking about from Zaporizhzhia. We've seen that really step up in the past week and a half. We're seeing Russia again in Donetsk really push up. A lot of it's always been towards Pokrovsk. This time just east of that city. They're continuing to stretch up to try to cut off Ukrainian supplies. But right now we're talking about Sumy, because on the border with Sumy, it was on May 22nd that Vladimir Putin ordered his army to create a 10-mile wide buffer zone inside of Ukraine, sort of to keep his country safe, even though you and I both know that that's not really what he's doing here. And so if you look on deep state maps, you'll notice that we've definitely seen a change. Just if we go back 1 week ago to the 23rd, Russia had taken some territory, Ukrainians had claimed some back. Go back to May 2nd, and you'll see there was no territory in which Russia had inside of Ukraine. Fast forward to the 29th, and you'll see right here in the middle, Russia started taking this. If you back up a day, back up another day, there had been some movement. It was truly back on the 22nd was the last time there was nothing here in which Russia had. Fast forward, in this now push, in order to have more land inside of Ukraine, there's 50,000 troops across the border in Sumy. Those troops were put there because, Ukraine was in the Kursk Oblast, and so Russia brought a lot of their troops in the front lines there. And so while they're there, they said, hey, let's just keep pushing in. And this was something that Zelensky had warned of really 2 months ago, saying, hey, look, after Russia clears out Kursk, in which they're saying that was a major loss for Ukraine. I don't think it was. It pulled away the Russian troops and equipment from the front lines over there. What pretty much Zelensky was saying is that while Russia has those troops, they're actually adding more, and they're getting ready to move. Fast forward to the 22nd, they started moving in. And today's big development is just kind of south of where they already were, in which, okay, you can go back and say that Russia did have a foothold there, but now you can see a big change in which there is territory that Ukraine not only lost, but Russia has taken over. This little village down here, and you can see it is quite small, but Russia did already have this territory not too long ago when they first started their invasion. This is just the kickoff, and Ukrainians have been doing a great job in building fortifications, especially as it goes towards Sumy, because Russia tried to get it before, and they were unable to. So now this brings us to what is Russia actually actively doing. So here we have right now is the Russian Defense Committee chief, who said that Ukraine, if they eject or reject any peace plans, quote, Zelensky's historical regime will be left without Zaporizhzhia, Donetsk, Sumy, Kharkiv, Odessa. We've kind of talked about this in other maps, in which we don't think that Russia plans to stop at Sumy. We think that what they want to do is take every single state or oblast on the border and make that the buffer zone. And so that would be cutting down all the way through Sumy, Kharkiv, all the way down to Donetsk, and then more of Zaporizhzhia, and potentially even the rest of Kherson. Russia wants to grab all of that and call it neutral territory and make it in which, they can vote for wherever they be in. And you know how Russia does their referendums. It is, we're going to essentially scare out most of the population, truck in Russians, and then vote and say that the public wants to be a part of this. It's just another way that Russia does their stuff. But now we're going to move over to comments from Syrskyi, the Commander-in-Chief. This is an article from the Kyiv Independent. By the way, if you're not subscribed to them, they do great reporting. They actually just released a new documentary about how Putin himself, always champions Christians and how he needs to save the Christians, when realistically speaking, when he goes into these territories, he does the exact opposite to clergymen and things like that. They torture them, they scare them, they put all this blackmail on them, which doesn't make any sense. They say that these priests are having weapons inside their churches, which is not true at all. So now, according to Syrskyi, Ukraine's armed forces are inflicting substantial losses on the Russian troops, claiming 34,000 losses in May alone. That is over 1,000 a day. That is sort of the same numbers that we keep on getting from the Ukrainian sources. If I pull up, say, like the Kiev Post, I mean, you can literally pull up any news sources, Kiev Post. Today's numbers is 1,250, 2 tanks, 54 artillery, and 5 armed vehicles, which is weird because those numbers actually been a lot lower than usual. Not the casualty rate, but instead the tanks and artillery. It's because Russia is doing new techniques on the front lines. They're using their drones differently. They're using their missiles differently. We're seeing more, I mean, realistically speaking, more drone attacks than, say, missile attacks. And the way that Ukraine and Russia have been fighting on the front lines have changed greatly. Russia never used to do a lot of things. They used to just do the meat grinder, and that was it. Even though the commander who actually created that, who did Mariupol and other areas, is now commanding the Russian military, they're doing smaller groups moving in, targeting alongside with drones, smaller groups, and then later with tanks, which is why the tank numbers have been down a lot, because they're not using as many because they don't have as many. So when it comes to Syrskyi, he says that Ukrainian artillery, aviation, and drone systems have been targeting enemy units even before they reach their positions. So they're going behind the scenes and taking that stuff out. And Syrskyi has stated before that on the front of the Kursk front, he says it's ongoing. However, he says that the Russians have had an advantage in the use of fiber-optic drones. And this is one of those ways where we're trying to talk about that they've changed the way that fighting is done on the front lines. And I've showed you a couple of videos on TikTok and here on YouTube. But before, drones were just kind of flown just using transmitters. Over time, both sides have been able to disrupt said transmitters, which is why at night when Russia sends their drones, they're not as effective anymore. But now they've invented something that's not really new. It's been used on tow missiles and other kind of missiles, which is essentially having the drones completely connected to something. And this something here is fiber optics. These fiber optic cables can go for kilometers on, and we've seen them go for 10 kilometers, etc. And essentially, it's just like a barrel on the back of the drone. So as it flies, it gives an uninterrupted view of what's in front. And so Russia has been using this technology to bypass the Ukrainian jamming systems and hit said targets. It's that alongside with smaller groups that are being pushed into Ukraine, in which Russia is starting to get a little bit of an advantage. Now, Ukraine does have these drones, but it looks like Russia is able to manufacture them on another level. Remember, you need someone to manufacture fiber optic cables, and you can only imagine where Russia is getting that material from. And yes, we're talking about you, China. That being said, because of said attacks happening all over Sumy, evacuations are now underway. Remember that the main city of Sumy, within the Oblast of Sumy, is not too far away, and right now we're seeing evacuation notices for towns all over this part of Sumy. Remember, Russia is amassing even more troops in other areas, even all the way down towards Kharkiv, in which, all right, let's go back a little bit. If we look on the maps, let's go back a month. There really hasn't been much of a change. Ukrainians actually liberated this area, 3 weeks ago? About 3.5 weeks ago. But that's where we're at, the current status of war. We are really, truly, if we go down even, let's go towards Pokrovsk. You could say to yourself, let's go back a month. Russia has stretched out. I think we're at 300 square kilometers over here. But if you go in the grand scheme of things, let's go back to the map here. And let's say that this is May 30th, 2025. If we go back to May 30th, 2024, there really hasn't been a change. Sure, they've taken more territory towards Pokrovsk, which, you can clearly see now is We're going all the way up here. All the way up here. But in the grand scheme of things, the war hasn't really changed much. Russia hasn't really gained much. So, and let's remember that we're getting ready to round 1 million losses on the Russian side. I think we're about 10,000 away, so roughly about 9 days until that number. And a decent amount of those losses have occurred in the past year. If on average Russia is losing, say even 1,000 men a day, you're talking about 365,000 men a year at a minimum. And that's the lower side of that average. It could be higher than that. Because Russia is just they're running out of a lot of good equipment, and so they're still using that meat grinder method, and it doesn't really seem like that method now with the newer one, who knows what's going to happen, but it seems like the Russian losses are going to be too much soon, to the point to where we're already seeing Russia not able to advance the way they want to. But I have to leave with this. The next 3 to 4 weeks will determine what exactly happens. Because A, we know that Russia doesn't want peace, and they've been clear with that. But if they don't have the manpower to really push through, if Ukrainians are able to stop them, then Russia will have to come to the table. And that's where we're at. That is just my assessment based upon Deep State and the comments we're getting. Now, let me know what you think in the comment section below. And if you haven't done so yet, please subscribe, turn on notifications, give this video a thumbs up, and make sure you sign up for my Substack. There is a free version for a newsletter. You get emailed out. We just started 3 days ago, so I'm still trying to get used to it. You probably get maybe 1 email a day, maybe not as much on the weekends. But I just want to say thank you to everyone. I appreciate your support, and I hope you stay safe and sound.